Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new to my channel, hello, my name is Caitlin Elliott, and I cover true crime stories on Tuesdays and Fridays. And as I mentioned in my last video, February is Black History Month. So I wanted to talk about another instance of Black history, and today I'm going to be talking about the murder of Tupac Shakur. And everyone knows who Tupac is. He was a rapper back in the 90s. So I just want to talk about mostly like what happened in his life and led up to his murder, if that makes sense. So on June 16th of 1971 in East Harlem, New York, City in New York, Lassane Crooks, which is Tupac's legal name, he was born to a young lady, and her name was Alice Faye Williams. And she later changed her name to Afeni Shakur, which is how Tupac got his name changed. And Afeni, at the time of Tupac's birth, she was a member of the Black Panther Party. And it said at the time that being in the group, it actually influenced her to change her name, if that makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about the Black Panther Party and Afeni's affiliation with the group. So back in the 60s and 70s, the Black Panther Party was created as a revolutionary group that was used to help protect African Americans, and they would patrol the neighborhoods and keep them safe from police. So in 1969, Afeni, she was actually arrested and accused of plotting a terrorist attack in New York City. And it wasn't just in New York City, so it was all over the state of New York. It was in New York City and all over the state of New York is what they were saying that she had been trying to bomb. And I'm not sure if someone just like claimed to have seen her out and about trying to do these actions, or if they straight up just accused her of doing it just because she was black. Or in part of the Black Panther Party. I personally have no idea, but that is what was said that happened. And she was arrested, and she had to go to court for this. Now, Afeni, she did not have a lawyer or anything, any type of defense team to prove her innocence. But she actually ended up being acquitted in the courts about the whole thing, which is crazy because this was back in the 60s, remember? And back in the 60s, everyone was really racist, and you usually need to have a lawyer for these types of things, but they instantly acquitted her from her trial. And what's even more wild at the time that this was going on, Afeni was actually, I believe she was like 6 months pregnant with Tupac. So for the first 11 years of his life, Tupac, he became obsessed, so to speak, with his family tradition. His family tradition was they had a history of revolutions. And he became very proud of this and how his family stood up for racial injustice in America. And he learned most of this from what his mother Afeni had said, because not only was she a member of the Black Panther Party, but she was also very vocal in her political beliefs and what she thought and she felt. And though Tupac, he would eventually become one of the world's greatest rappers, he was a very quiet kid. And he had a very strong love for acting while he was growing up. However, like most kids are, unfortunately, this made him a target for bullying. And kids, they would honestly bully people over everything these days, like any little thing just to make themselves feel better. And life was very difficult for Tupac as his mother bounced from place to place, and she would bring him with her, and it was very hard for her to find a job. And this proved to be difficult because of her affiliation with the Black Panther Party. And she would get hired and then terminated almost immediately because of how she was with the Black Panther Party. And her feelings about this, she just kept getting so upset and depressed, feeling like she couldn't take care of the family, that she turned to drugs and alcohol. And they ended up moving to Baltimore, Maryland, which I'm from Maryland, and Baltimore is actually about an hour away from where I grew up. And if you are from Maryland, I was born and raised in Maryland, obviously I just said, you would know that it's foul and drug-filled in Baltimore. It's terrible over there. There's a heroin epidemic, there is a crack epidemic, there's a prescription drug epidemic where people will buy prescription drugs off of each other's in the street and have fatal overdoses. It's just terrible down there. And despite all of this, Tupac, he really wanted to see his mother get clean. And he worked really hard in school, and he was very, very smart, and he actually ended up being accepted into the Baltimore School for the Arts. And Tupac, he's a very friendly young man, and he would try to introduce himself to literally anybody he met. And when he entered college, he really wanted to make some genuine friends. So, as anyone who goes through college knows, you have to, when you first start, you have to do that awkward introduction where you say your name, your major, and some random fact about yourself. Well, when Tupac stood up and he introduced his name as Tupac Shakur, the other kids, they all began to laugh at him. And this made Tupac very, very upset. And he stood up for himself, and he was saying that he was named after the Native American name Tupac by his mother, and he said not to bully him anymore because he would not let it happen again. He was going to stand up for himself every time. So when he was in college, there was a class that allowed him to read William Shakespeare. And it was like an instant connection. He fell in love with William Shakespeare, and he could not get enough Shakespeare. And then he began to realize how powerful poetry would be when it was combined with rhythm. And when it came to his rap career, Tupac really said that this was one of the big steps that set his career in motion. And unfortunately, Tupac had began to notice that being in Baltimore, it had really affected his mother's drug addiction. And it got to the point where he wasn't even able to recognize his own mother at all because she was constantly strung out on drugs. And like I said, I'm from Maryland, and I've been to Baltimore, and I can tell you that is a 100% true fact. There are people, unfortunately, who are laying in the streets and just all over Baltimore, just so totally zonked out on drugs. They don't know where they are, who they are. They can't speak coherently, and I can only sympathize with Tupac. That must have been so hard to deal with. And he was really worried that something would end up happening to her, so he felt like an intense need to come and save her and be a big hero in her life. And however, there was one issue, and the issue was that he was still enrolled in the Baltimore School for the Arts. And this was an accomplishment that he had grown to love and cherish. And he did not want to leave whatsoever. And he felt like he had to because his mother really needed to get clean. So Baltimore School of the Arts, they tried to beg and plead with Tupac to stay at the school and not give up his education. But with Tupac, he was a very family-oriented person, and he did not want to see his mother end up anything happening to his mother. I mean, she's his mother, so I don't blame him for wanting to take care of her and be scared about losing her and putting her first before his education. So the Shakur family, they packed up everything they owned, and they sold their house, and they actually moved to Los Angeles, California, because he wanted to get a better life for his mother, because he thought it would be better for her out there. And unfortunately, this would be proved incorrect. And it's said that at the time, they thought that Los Angeles was a lot worse than Baltimore in reality. So his mother began being introduced to crack cocaine, and she was just unable to work. And it was terrifying Tupac because he was coming home and witnessing her strung out all the time. And because Afeni was always high, she could not work, and no one wanted to hire her because of how strung out she was. And with no primary source of income, the family was no doubt going to end up homeless and in the streets. So Tupac decided that he would do whatever it took to help his family. And that meant doing the one thing that he could do, and that's drug dealing. So Tupac, he began starting to hang out with different types of crowds and different types of people. And he started showing off his talented rapping skills to his friends, and this impressed them a lot. And he began attending the poetry classes of Layla Steinberg. I'm so sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. It's either Layla or Leela. And she actually became his manager, and she got him signed by the same manager of the hip-hop group called Digital Underground, which, Digital Underground, I'll talk about them in a little bit, but he was their roadie and their backup vocalist. So the Digital Underground, they were known for their song that came out in the year 1990 called The Humpty Dance. And this song became a number one hit. Well, not a number one hit, became a best-selling hit, and it hit number 11 on the charts of 1990. And after a while, Tupac, he started to feel like he had a lot of things to say about society, about just everything. And he felt like in the group Digital Underground, he felt like he didn't have a voice to be able to vocalize how he felt. So he decided to leave Digital Underground, and he started to want to do his own thing. And Tupac, he decided to write music. And he wanted to write music for people who couldn't speak for themselves. For example, whenever he was filming his movie called Juice, he was reading a newspaper article that actually stunned him, and he was just shocked beyond belief. And it was about a story about a 12-year-old girl who had gotten impregnated by her cousin, which is, in fact, incest, if you didn't know. And he really felt like he could give her a voice for the nation to hear, so then he started writing the song called Brenda's Got a Baby in the year of 1991. So this song became a major breakthrough for Tupac, and it became his first major hit, though this credited a lot of attention to some of the wrong crowds. And this was a man named Suge Knight, which if you ever heard of Suge Knight, you would know how disgusting he really is. He's not a good person. And he wanted to work with Tupac on albums, trying to help him become famous. You know, he just offered his help. And he worked a lot with very vicious, high-end criminals, and he just relished the gangster lifestyle. And he wanted Tupac to participate with him, but Tupac, he luckily turns Suge Knight down. He's like, this isn't good for me. And in early 1991, there was a very vicious police attack that involved a young black man, and it was put all over the news. Everybody knew about what had happened. So Tupac, he was watching it go down on TV, and he was very obviously and understandably upset about that this violence was still happening. The same type of police brutality that his mother had experienced back in the 1960s and 70s, that she had joined the Black Panther Party to protest against. So he began to write down all of his feelings onto this paper, and thus he created the song called Trapped, a song that became very controversial in society. In October of 1991, Tupac was actually stopped by police for jaywalking, which, if you don't know what jaywalking is defined as the act of illegally crossing the street without regards to approaching traffic. So when he was arrested, the police, they then began to ask him what his name was. And when they found out his name was Tupac, they laughed at him in his face. And this incident greatly upset Tupac, understandably. And he started standing up for himself against the cops like he did back when he was in school. And this pissed the cops off. They're like, how dare this black guy stand up to us, the police officers? So they got pissed, and they started literally beating the crap out of him. And they actually beat him so severely that he blacked out from his injuries. And while he was still unconscious, they were still beating him. So now I remind you again, this whole incident, even with the cops coming and beating him up, was over jaywalking, okay? He wasn't doing anything too terrible. He was jaywalking, and they beat him for it. And he was literally bullied for his name. And then when he tried to stick up for himself, saying, oh, my name's Tupac, this is what it means, they literally beat him up for trying to stick up for himself. Like, what in the actual fuck? How does that make any sense? That doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't understand. Can someone please explain that to me? Because I clearly don't understand the logic with that, okay? I don't. And obviously, Tupac was furious if it just happened to him for no reason, which I would be too. And, I mean, it was with no other things that he was doing wrong other than jaywalking. So, he got in contact with a lawyer, and he began to explain his case to the lawyer, hoping that this could get settled in court. And once again, he said, all I was doing was jaywalking. And they decided to actually sue the entire police department for the city of Oakland, California. And that is exactly what Tupac did. And luckily, Tupac successfully sued the Oakland City, California Police Department. And he was literally beaten for no reason. And this incident actually became a major turning point in his life. And after this incident, Tupac then launched a social reform movement to help improve the lives of young black men. And this movement he decided to call was Thug Life. And he began to fight back about what he had experienced. And he wanted to be known for something more other than just being a black male. He's like, I may be a black male, but I want to be a rapper. I want to be famous. This is who I am. I'm more than just my skin color and my sex and gender. So Tupac, he became a warrior for the cause, essentially. He used a pen and paper as his weapon, and he started writing down as many lyrics as he could. And he started using Thug Life as a way to help those people who were deemed weaker than whites by society, especially the poor blacks who were mislabeled as thugs simply because they were black and they had no money. So even though Tupac had money at the time, he still didn't understand fully what it felt like to be a poor black man. So to make his rap music more relevant for the times and what was occurring where he was living, he started putting himself in their shoes, and this knowingly made him a target against the police and the racists. So things started to get really bad for Tupac around the year 1992 when a young cop was killed by a shooter who isn't known to the public who shot him. And when the shooter was arrested, instead of taking responsibility for his own actions, the shooter claimed that he couldn't think straight because he was listening to Tupac's album, Tupacalypse, and it polluted his mind to make him want to kill a police officer. This is what the shooter said. I don't know, it doesn't make any sense to me. And when the police and the media heard about this, they started having television hosts start telling society that they need to have the Tupac's album, Tupacalypse, removed from the shelves. So they said that Tupac made music simply to just tell people to kill cops. And he and everyone knew that they deemed it preposterous that anyone would say something so outrageous like that. And even the vice president at the time, his name was Dan Quayle, I believe that's how you pronounce his name. He went totally ballistic at the CD that Tupac came out with. And he demanded for Tupac's album to be permanently removed from the shelves and never be put back up there again. So just a few months later, in February of 1993, Tupac, he then released his second album, and just a matter of months, this is incredible, his album managed to go platinum. That's fantastic considering it's just a second album. So after his album went platinum, he decided he was going to travel back to his college, the Baltimore School for the Arts, back in Baltimore. And at this time, he was extremely famous, and he was completely wrapped up in the thug lifestyle. And so it was a shock to see him back at his old school. Like, nobody knew he was coming or anything. And as he was walking around the school, he decided to stop by and visit his old teacher and his favorite teacher, which is the same person, the one who had taught him the Shakespeare. And even though his entourage had followed him there, he asked his entourage if they could leave him alone for a couple minutes so he could talk to his old teacher. And his teacher was able to easily see through his thug life facade. And when Tupac saw his teacher, his whole face lit up and he had this huge grin from ear to ear. He was just so thrilled to see his teacher. And he told his teacher that if he was considered fake, he thought that nobody would want to buy his records. So that's why he gave off this thug life persona. And so that's when his favorite teacher had told him, and I'm going to quote it for you guys, "You are worth as much to these people dead as you are alive." And that was, his old teacher could not stand seeing that Tupac was heading down this direction. So even though Tupac was warned about the thug life lifestyle, he still couldn't stop. He loved it too much. So in 1993, he had traveled down to Georgia with some friends, and now we all know Georgia, as we know, is a lot more racist than California. It's wild down in Georgia. And to this day, it's a very racially dominated state. And they are still very proud of the fact that they are very racist. And, well, as Tupac is walking around Georgia, he begins to notice a black man who is being assaulted and attacked for what he thought was literally no reason other than the fact that he was black. And so this reminded Tupac of what it was like growing up and how he ended up getting bullied a lot as a kid. So he remembered what his mother had endured and what he had gone through. And so he went up to defend that black man. He walked over to the men. They told them to leave the guy alone. And so that's when the men started to turn on Tupac himself and began to attack him simply for being black. And in an effort to protect himself, Tupac, he pulls out a gun and he shoots at both of them and he wounds both of them. And as it turns out, one of the men that he injured was actually an undercover police officer. Because of course, right? Of course. And of course, after this incident, Tupac was he was arrested and he was charged with 2 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. And at his trial, he declared that the reason he shot those men was not an attempt to kill them, but simply because he wanted to protect himself from these attacks. He was simply being attacked for no reason. And after this, the court, they reasoned with Tupac that what he had done was, in fact, self-defense. So they ended up dropping the charges against him, and he began to be seen as a hero for the black community. And as he's leaving, there are press just swarming the courthouse. And they're asking him if he had anything to say about this. And all he had to say was, thug life. Once he reached 22 years of age, Tupac, he was actually able to personally feed everybody in his family on his budget from becoming a rapper. And he becomes ecstatic because he is being recognized on a daily basis. He's able to take care of his family. And he was just becoming an idol to all these young people. But as we all know, with becoming an idol is a lot of responsibilities. And this took a heavy toll on Tupac. And it got so heavy that he decided that he was going to have to turn to drugs once again. And in fact, this drug addiction became so powerful that if he didn't have weed or to get a hold of weed as soon as possible, he just went absolutely apeshit ballistic on everybody. So because of how famous he was, he just started hanging out with all sorts of famous people, including Biggie Smalls, who started idolizing Tupac himself. Tupac loved putting on his gangster persona when other famous people were around, especially when he didn't want anyone to see him as a big softie. And Tupac, he became so famous that he started having all types of parties at his place, even being invited to luxurious parties himself at the homes of different famous people. So that's when he met a girl at one of these parties, and he wanted to bring her back to the apartment for the first time. And he wants her to spend the night. So although nothing had occurred, this woman still claimed that Tupac had sexually assaulted her. And she started telling everybody and telling all these news outlets that Tupac had physically raped her. And there was a moment at the party that she was in a bedroom with Tupac, but at the time he had left and a bunch of other guys had come into the bedroom afterwards, and he had no idea what happened after he had left. He didn't know. So she decided to go to the police, and this becomes one of the darkest moments in Tupac's career. And he is ultimately arrested and charged with the rape of this young girl, though he claimed it had never occurred, and they never did any type of rape test or anything to see if it was legit, like if he legitimately raped her. So Tupac, understandably, he became extremely frustrated with this, and he believes that he is being set up by the police and just trying to be taken down by society. So Tupac, he starts running low on money, and he starts struggling to make do, and that's when he decides to record a song with Lil Sean. And Tupac, he's just thrilled by this. He was like, I'm so excited, this could help boost my career. And the more albums that got sold, the more money he would make. So he agrees to go to this arrangement, and he enters the recording studio. So as Tupac is entering the recording studio, a bunch of men pop out of seemingly nowhere, out of the shadows, seems like, and they start coming after Tupac. And they start to shoot at him, and one actually hits Tupac. But luckily he survives after the shooting, and he is only injured. However, this good news would not last, and the police came back with the results from Tupac's rape accusation, and it turns out that he was subsequently charged with this lady's rape and was sent to prison. And while he was in prison, he started receiving multiple letters from fans. And there was just one in particular, like a letter in particular, that really caught his eye. And it was a letter from a young lady named Angela, who is actually a really gorgeous model. And the two really hit it off, and they started to fall in love. And as she was just like really intrigued by his gangster thug life persona. She'd never like seen anything like this before. So after a while of writing letters, Angela decided she wanted to go and meet this self-proclaimed bad boy gangster rapper Tupac. So she travels to the prison that he's being held at to go and visit him. And after a while of writing, like they were trying to get ready to visit, and she actually went to go and visit. She is shocked to see that Tupac is not what she expected at all, and truly one of the best people that she says that she has ever experienced and witnessed in her life. And he was not this rough and tough ensemble that he liked to put off. He was something different. He had a bigger meaning in life. He was very soft. He was kind-hearted. He was a great guy. And after being in jail for 8 months, Suge Knight, he decides he's going to bail Tupac out of prison. And he paid a $2 million bail. And he was like, I'll make you a deal with you. If I pay this $2 million bail, you have to sign underneath my record company. So Tupac, he saw no other choice but then to sign with Death Row Records. So that's exactly what he did. And Suge Knight bailed him out of jail. So Tupac's later songs in the 1990s started being about gangs and drugs and alcohol in order to please Suge. So over time, Tupac and Angela, they continued to write letters to each other. And he really started to fall in love with her. And towards the end of his life, he really wanted to start protecting everything he ever had. So he wanted to do what he could to protect Angela. So around this time, he started getting obsessed with his own mortality. He started fearing that he may be killed at any moment by hidden enemies. And he started becoming really fearful, and he wanted to leave Death Row Records. And he wanted to get away from that thug lifestyle. He just wanted to go back to what he was doing prior to meeting all that. However, this really, really pissed off Suge Knight. And he was just furious. He did not want to let Tupac go. And he said that you can't leave because you owe Death Row Records way too many debts. You owe us too much money. So, unfortunately, he had to stay there no matter what because of these debts. So then came the fateful night of September 7th of 1996. So Tupac, he had decided to attend the Bruce Seldon and Mike Tyson fight with Suge Knight at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, Nevada. So one of Suge's associates' names was Trayvon Lane, and he was a member of the MOB Prius gang, and they were from Compton, California, and they spotted Orlando Baby Lane Anderson in the lobby of the MGM, and shit just went down. You know, you can't have the Bloods and the Crips go after each other. It was not a pretty sight. So after the fight broke out, Tupac, he left with Suge Knight in a BMW sedan, and they both decided to travel to Club 662, which was owned by Suge. So around 11 p.m. that night, they were actually stopped by two police members for playing their music too loudly and not having a license plate on their car. And they were let go by police whenever they found the license plates in the trunk of the car, which I don't know why they weren't on the front. Maybe it was just to hide it so they wouldn't get targeted by gangs. I'm not 100% sure why they were in the trunk, but that would make sense to me. And they went on their way, and while they were on the way, they noticed a vehicle pull up next to them with these two women who recognized Tupac, and they were just thrilled and elated. They were like, oh, they were like basically fangirling, like, oh my god, it's Tupac, oh my god, you know? So he rolled down his window, and they kindly invited them to come to the Club 662 and meet him there. And the woman, they both agreed, and they left. So around 11:15 p.m., a white four-door Cadillac, they pulled up next to Tupac's car, and the back seat window of the Cadillac was rolled down very slowly, and gunshots began rapidly firing from the gun towards Tupac's car, and it hit Tupac 4 times, twice in the chest, once in the arm, and once in the thigh. So obviously, Tupac was very quickly rushed to the hospital, and he was placed in a medically induced coma to be an effort to save his life. And on Friday, September 13th, there was actually a removal of his right lung. But that afternoon of September 13th of 1996, Tupac Shakur died from respiratory failure that had caused a cardiac arrest. And doctors, they tried so hard to revive him, but Afeni, his mother, she ceased medical treatment for Tupac. They were just like, this isn't going to work. Please let my son go. And Tupac was pronounced dead at 4:03 p.m. of that day. And obviously this was very important to help to find out who killed Tupac. And so, just a year later, Sergeant Kevin Manning told the Las Vegas Sun newspaper that Tupac's murder may never be solved. This was quoted by him in the newspaper. And in 2002, the Los Angeles Times, they published a story by Chuck Phillips called Who Killed Tupac Shakur? A year after the shooting, Suge Knight, he told everybody at an ABC Primetime Live interview that he didn't know who killed Tupac, and even if he did, he wasn't going to tell anybody. And in 2018, a Crips gang leader, his name was Dwayne Keith D. Davis, and he claimed to have been in the car that night with Tupac's shooter when the shooting had occurred. And when he was asked who the shooter could have been, he said he couldn't say who it was due to the street code. And in 2016, a former death row bodyguard named James McDonald, he said that he saw Orlando Baby Lane Anderson and then other Southside Crip members were in the car that fired at Tupac. And of course, a lot of people believe that Biggie Smalls was involved with his murder. And of course, that proved to be incorrect because Biggie Smalls himself was murdered in 1997 in a drive-by shooting, ironically. And as I always do in my videos, I always provide my own personal thoughts and opinions about this case. So that's what I'm going to speak about now. And I personally believe that Suge Knight was behind the murder of Tupac. I really honestly do, especially because he was so pissed off whenever he decided to leave wanted to leave the Death Row Records. He was just like, I need to leave. And he got so pissed off at him, I wouldn't put it past him to have, come up with this whole scheme to get Tupac killed. So, additionally, Suge Knight, he is actually in prison right now for voluntary manslaughter as he drove his car into a car that had 2 men inside of it and he killed both of them. And it's possible he got so pissed off that he ordered for Tupac to get murdered. And of course, this is just my theory, my thoughts and opinions, and I would love to know what your guys' thoughts and opinions are down below in the comments section. Please like and subscribe because I post every single Tuesdays and Fridays. And make sure your notifications are turned on so you never miss a video. Alright, that's all I've got for you guys today. I hope to see you guys in my next video. Until then, bye.